So yes, I'm going to be talking about security from a different perspective to the way that we normally talk about it, which is looking at your organization, how your organization is represented, but from an external perspective, not sitting within the perimeter, not doing scans from inside to out, but actually giving you that completely external view of your environment and giving you the visibility and the ability to protect that environment. And it doesn't really come as any surprise when you look back over the last 10 years how we are seeing dramatic changes in the way that we communicate with the outside world, with the way that we do business with our partners and with our customers. It's gone from what was essentially marketing through to full transactions online. Now, there's very few instances where you actually need to deal with anybody at all. And all of that infrastructure leads to an extension of the digital channels that you need to support that business. And your perimeter stays in place. You're still probably keeping a lot of the data within the bounds of your environment and the traditional controls that you have around that. But there are now these expanding digital channels, web being the obvious one, but mobile, social as well, are increasing your perimeter, and the ability to protect that if you don't have the visibility of it is a challenge. And obviously you've also got the fourth box there, the rogue. Those organizations or people who are seeking to profit from your organization, from your brand, whether that's attacking you directly, whether that's through copycat, but they are essentially an extension of your digital channel. You might not want it, it might not be something which is welcomed, but it's still part of your digital footprint to a certain extent. And that extension out of the perimeter is essentially an extended attack surface. The attack surface is no longer just your base level, but you need to think about securing the overall environment. How do you ensure that you are managing all of those assets which are not necessarily in your control, not necessarily visible to you? How are you controlling that environment? And when you look at some of the sort of the research, this information came from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report. 80% of incidents that led to breaches came from external sources. Insider threat is still an issue, but most attacks are coming from outside of the environment. About 50% involved assets that were unmanaged or unknown within the infrastructure. And it's that number there that we are seeking to reduce. We want to bring down the blind spots within the environment that are enabling attacks to take place. How do we ensure that all of the assets that are part of the organization are under management, are correctly patched, are correctly secured, or just decommissioned if they're not being used anymore? And I talk about sort of traditional controls, and as the digital channels increases, so the challenges increase with that. The more digital channels you have, the more you need to engage with solutions that will provide you the information you need to manage your environment. So let's look at those digital channels. We'll start with web, and just asking a few basic questions. There's quite a few of you in here today. How many of you would have the confidence to stand up and say how many websites you have as part of your organization, and be confident that I couldn't find more? Anybody gonna brave it? No. We typically find about 30% more assets sitting outside of the organization than people know about. It's a significant number of systems which are sitting out there, have been stood up for various reasons, or outside of process, which is just sat there representing your business, maybe transacting business, that just people don't know about. There's all the supporting infrastructure that goes with those websites. There's links to other organizations. As you build websites, or as you have other people build those websites, links are made to different different resources, if you will. What control do you have over those? What happens if one of those third parties gets breached? How does that impact your overall security? And then simply, are those assets secure? Broken links might seem irrelevant, but they're an opportunity for somebody to exploit. Certificates, how you represent trust with the people that you're dealing with. Login pages, secure login pages, how are you managing that environment? And then compliancy issues. I've spoken to a couple of people today talking about EU GDPR. If you are sharing information or have forms on the site and you're transferring that information insecurely, whether that is with insecure certificates or no certificates, that's a compliancy issue. And that doesn't even speak to the internal policies of how these sites should be set up and how they should be controlled. Just talking about that third-party component for a moment. Your web page is held on a server in probably HTML, and the client is essentially just a code execution tool. It's going to just run the code that is sent to it. When I ask for the page, the HTML is delivered in the form of a document object model, and then I run that code. And the code that goes into the DOM doesn't necessarily come from your server. It comes from these additional components here. You'll notice, the Twitter widget. If you've got social networking on your site, you're making calls out to Twitter to share information. What other code have you got on there? Most sites have compatibility code hosted by typically Google, that stopped being supported about 3 years ago. jQuery is a very common site for people to use. They don't host that on their own servers, they're taking it out to other organizations. All of the trackers, all of the beacons that are running within the code are often sourced elsewhere. What happens if one of those gets compromised? And then people are able to intercept the communication between you and your customers. This stuff is going to be executed on the client. This is just going to execute what's been shared in the DOM. So how are you managing that? What is the risk to the environment? And are you mitigating against that risk? When we look at the external footprint, we tend to break it down into two areas. The infrastructure, which is that what have I got? Is it managed? How many hosts and servers are there? What certificates am I using? What hosting am I using? What IP blocks? What domains? The type of things that just need to be managed, they need to be part of your infrastructure. Below the line, what we're looking for there is changes. What's happening to your infrastructure in a real-time basis? Are certificates expiring? Are we seeing those domains expire or new redirects? What new sites are being stood up? Have marketing got a new project and now they're just going out and setting up a site? It's representing you, it's linking back into the business. There's potentially a beachhead for people to compromise so that they can further exploit within the organization. What's happening now versus what should I be doing on a process-driven basis to secure the environment? And I just picked a couple news articles that have come up in the last couple of weeks here, actually. The MongoDB servers, people who are using MongoDB to serve their data, targeted by ransomware. Wipe the data and then free it up if you pay up the money. Can you say how many of these servers are in the environment? Can you say if they're secure? Do you know where they are? Do you have that visibility of the systems? This one came up yesterday, the protected US military server compromised through an army recruitment site. And it's interesting, when I talk to people, they often will sort of say, yeah, but that's just a marketing site. That doesn't have any link back to our infrastructure. If you compromise that, the worst you can do is deface it. Well, defacement isn't great. But here, if you look down at the box I put on it, on its own, neither vulnerability is particularly interesting, but when you pair them together, it's actually very serious. People don't think about the fact that if there's one misconfiguration on one system, it might then lead to other misconfigurations within the environment and confidential information being breached. And this is the visibility we're looking to give you, that view of your infrastructure, what is representing you to the outside world, bringing that under control so that you can secure it. Sort of similar question to when I was asking about the websites, is how many mobile apps do you think your organizations have? This one, people will typically answer one or two. We've got one in Google and we've got one in Apple. When you look back at how the mobile ecosystem was working about 10 years ago now, there were tens of mobile stores, certainly Google and Apple, Windows, Nokia, and then a few others. If I fast forward to now, there are now over 500 mobile app stores in existence, serving apps based on geography, vertical, different types of niche areas. These stores have to get their apps from somewhere. They don't just stand up with no content. And there is a whole ecosystem that sits behind the mobile environment. And we've just sort of tried to visualize that here. We've got about 100 stores on this chart. And then we've tried to show the relationship between those different stores. You post your app to Google Play, within a few hours, within a few days, it will start to proliferate around the infrastructure. So each of the little icons is a store. The red boxes talks about whether that store will allow you to upload an app to it or whether it is just linking to other stores. The solid lines talk about copying apps. The dotted line talks about reference back to the other store. You're keeping up with this. But what I said there is that if I go to Google Play from Docomo, I've copied the app. So you've put your legitimate app in Google Play, and now it's been moved here with no link. It's been copied, not referenced, but copied to that store. If I now update my app in Google Play, maybe I realized that it was hopelessly insecure and I'm going to respond quickly to that and update the app. It's not going to be updated here or in 100 of the other stores that app is now in. That's got the old version, so people are going to still have whatever nasty was built into the original app. I can also just unpack the app and make changes to it. I can just insert some code in there, whatever that is, whether it's trivially adware. That can have its own negative connotations if it starts scraping other data from the phone. I could just put maybe some ransomware in there and defame the business, or whatever it is I want to do. I've got the ability to make changes to that APK, bundle it back up, post it back to here, and anywhere else I feel like it, and people will find that app. And most of you're all in security, you're probably sensible, you probably only download your apps from the official stores. But when I had a Samsung phone a few years ago now and turned it on for the first time, that phone had 3 stores on it out of the box. It had the Google Play Store, had a Vodafone store and a Samsung store. They don't necessarily present themselves as stores, but they are serving apps. And the capability is in the phone from the moment you turn it on to go anywhere and download an app. I don't even have to go to a store. If I'm surfing a site, reading your content, sometimes you get a pop-up saying, wouldn't it be better if you could experience our content using this app? Click here and you can get the app. Where are you getting that app from? Is it coming from an official store, or are you just downloading a random app that just sits on a website and is now going to serve you that information? We ran some research late last year. We have a database of about 20 million apps that we've downloaded over time from both the primary stores and all of those additional stores within the ecosystem. And we just did a quick search to see, of the top 45 companies based across 5 verticals, how many apps those organizations had. And we found just under 250,000 apps relating to those businesses. That's any apps which directly are tied to that organization, which have just proliferated, or are using their brand or their name within the app to piggyback the services that those businesses represent. When you actually drill down into the data, we saw significant increase in those feral apps. The feral apps are the apps which don't live in the mobile stores. In Google, at the moment, there's about 4% of all of the apps in Google are malicious in one way or another. They are serving content which is going to give people a bad experience. When I move outside of Google to the other stores, that number increases to about 6 or 7% of blacklisted apps. In the feral space, where there's no store, no checking of the data, it's about 50% of all of the apps are serving some sort of malicious code. And we're seeing an increase in those blacklisted apps, those apps which are not going to give your users a good experience. Quite the opposite, they're going to give them a very negative experience. So this is an environment where we are seeing growing risks, growing threats in terms of the communication, the digital channels that you are setting up with your customers and partners. And again, I've asked the question already, how many actual apps do you think you have? How many of those apps are proliferating around the ecosystem? The answer is probably all of them. And then, are they the correct version? Are they the original app? Is it genuine code but just being served from somewhere else? What else is in that app? How is it managing it? And then the compliancy. What is your policy on mobile apps? And again, that's a question I usually find I get a null response to. People haven't thought about this. Not everybody even knows about the extent of the mobile ecosystem and how these apps are moving around. And again, picking a couple recent news articles, there was a report today about apps which are now serving serious numbers of downloads within Google Play, serving malicious code. And the Super Mario one is an interesting one. Super Mario was launched just the other side of Christmas on iOS, so only on Apple. But you can download that app now on Android, or at least you think you are, but it's serving a banking Trojan instead. And that's an important point. I sort of highlighted it there. These apps don't exist, and yet they are represented in the stores. And your brands could be in that same position. You may turn around and say, we don't have any apps, this isn't a problem for us. Isn't it? It just makes it easier for me to pretend to be you and to contact your customers. So, understanding what's out there and what is representing your organization is an important component. With web, you're in control of your infrastructure. With mobile, you've got those stores which are serving your content or lookalike content. On social, you have even less control. You just have your profiles, which you trust that the social media platform will keep secure, and then the rest is kind of left to fate. But if you look at this, really is just sort of confirming that social is here to stay. I probably don't need to go through the numbers. This one. Research based on the UK, 2/3 of people are using social media, mainly Facebook, quite a lot on Twitter. The number here that I find interesting is that last bullet. Over half of people on social media do not consider the authenticity of the accounts that they are using. So I can just create an account called Acme Help, that's a common one when it comes to social media campaigns, and just start promoting myself as the customer service team for Acme and start intercepting communications which are meant for Acme itself. And half of the people are going to do no checking at all. They're just going to trust me. I haven't posted any malicious links yet. I haven't asked for any DMs with account details. I've just gone on and I can just behave as if I am part of that business. The other half, I don't know, maybe they do an authenticity check, but are they looking at the URLs that are in these things? When you've got a bit.ly link in a media post, how many of you check whether that's safe? How do you check whether that's safe? So, you know, good man there, good man. I just don't click on them, that's my answer to that. But sometimes I forget, sometimes I'm interested, I'm excited, and I click on it, and I'm oh no, I didn't want to do that. Cisco are talking about Facebook scams were the most common form of malware in 2015. I haven't seen any data for 2016 yet. FBI are saying there's been a 4-fold rise in attacks stemming from social media. PwC are saying that about 12% of organizations are facing problems, incidents stemming from social media activity. So this is a growing area. This is an increasing concern. And similar questions again. What accounts do I have? And again, there is a gap here between what people think they have on social media and what is actually out there. It's even easier to stand up accounts if you're in a different team, you want to get something done, do a campaign or achieve a certain project. I also see inconsistency in the configurations of the official accounts. Some are locked, some aren't, some look monitored, some don't. What is out there? And then are those accounts which aren't related to the business, so we've got that known and the unknown, are the ones that are not related to the business, are they attacking you in some way? Do they pose a threat? And should we take that down? Should we mitigate that issue? And here, this is Metro Bank. Someone posted a message to Metro Bank saying, I think the app is a little bit dated, could we do a bit more with it? Metro Bank replied, oh, we're ever so sorry about that. Please provide some information and we'll look into it. And I'm sure you all can see that that is not an official URL. Everybody saw that, right? And this profile is completely fake. It's out there, but it's so easy, and that looks good. I look at that and I don't see, with my sort of visual checking, which is really all you're doing when you're on social media, it doesn't stand out, but it's there, it's collecting information, easily done. So I've talked about web, mobile, and social. Rogue is that last piece. And to talk about rogue, I kind of want to talk about that known unknown. I think that's a resizing issue. I think the N is underneath the bar. Known, unknown, and rogue. Known are those assets which you do know about. They're the things that are on that spreadsheet that you give to the vulnerability management and pen testing team on a quarterly or annual basis. They're the things which are being monitored for patching and securing, updating, keeping secure. The unknown are those things which sit outside of that environment. That's the 30% that I've been talking about. The difference, the things stood up. I blame marketing, but actually IT are just as guilty here in terms of standing up these things. The difference is marketing has the budget to go and pay someone to do it. IT has the know-how to go and do it themselves. So these things appear, and they're not in any process, they're not recorded, they're being done completely independently. And you find all sorts of things in shadow IT. I've found internal asset inventories, which presumably the IT guy wanted to access from home, so he shot a hole through the firewall to gain access to it, and I had visibility of that. We just went out and looked for the assets, and there it was. Mergers and acquisitions. Whenever two companies come together, there's an inevitable loss of information in that process, and whether the two spreadsheets actually ever meet and whether they're ever actually merged doesn't typically happen. So assets appear which are part of the acquired business but not being monitored correctly. And then the last one on this one is forgotten. Those sites where maybe a project was put in place to introduce a new and better service, maybe more secure even, but the old service is never turned off, it's never taken down, not left managed. What exposure comes from those assets which have just been left behind? They probably don't cost too much to leave them running, but what is the overall cost if one of those gets breached, compromised, and additional compromise can stem from that? And then there's rogue. So the phishing, the mobile apps, the fake social profiles, just simple domain infringement, people standing up websites and pretending to be you. I've talked about known and unknown because as we bring the unknown together, so that we've got that single inventory, that complete visibility of what's going on, we're now able to start saying, well, if it isn't in known, then it's rogue. We're now able to create that exceptions list that allows us to track and respond to those rogue assets as they appear, so that we can now start to starve the environment of oxygen. What is impersonating me? What websites? Those mobile apps, which do I want out there, which don't? Get those taken down. Same with social media. And who is leveraging the brand? What are the different threat actors that are taking place? Are these sites affiliated, or and therefore is it just a brand guideline issue? But what's taking place, and how do we then take action to mitigate against that? And just a couple examples here. That site on the left was a hotel booking site. There is actually a hotel, Bell Epoch. Their website actually looks a lot worse than this, and certainly the hotel rooms do not look as plush as this. They look more like the hotel room I stayed in last night, just over there. But this site, it was linked to an ad on Yahoo, and it's serving Angler EK. So you go to that site, it looks pretty good. You wouldn't, again, the visual check doesn't show anything unpleasant, but there's an exploit kit behind it. So the other hotel probably losing business for the wrong reasons. And then this one, HSBC were running a campaign, Young Entrepreneur Awards scheme, that expired over time. They let the domain expire. And someone else who was a young entrepreneur probably worked out that they could buy that domain and piggyback some traffic off of the HSBC name. And the content wasn't quite what HSBC would want. So, not keeping track of these assets, not monitoring, not maintaining them, can lead to negative consequences. So, how do we manage your digital footprint? We have what I like to refer to as an army of virtual users. I suppose technically we should refer to them as crawlers, but I think of them as virtual users because they are covert crawlers. They go out and they represent real human activity. We have egress points around the world so that we can come from different countries with different geolocation, different types of IP address, burnable IP addresses, residential IP addresses. So as we hit sites, we hit them as anonymous users. We mix up the browsers as well. Some malware will look for older browsers because older browsers are vulnerable or more likely to be vulnerable. So there's no point in serving my malware to a modern browser. I might as well wait until I hit an IIS-6 server, or IIS-6 client, I should say, and serve my malware there. So we go out with different browsers to encourage whatever is being delivered to be given to us. We download the entire site, but we do it typically over a period of 24 hours. So we go in fits and starts so that we're not looking like a crawler as we go across the site. We move the mouse, we pause as we click the links. It's all designed so that, yes, we get the information, but we also expose information, anything that is being delivered that otherwise wouldn't be seen because the behavior is detectable. And then we download everything. That document object model, we'll grab that and we'll analyze it. Any JavaScript, we'll evaluate the JavaScript. Is it behaving correctly? Whether it is from your site or from an external site, we'll still analyze that to ensure that the behavior is normal. Any images come down, we've got that information. And then we can analyze the data and provide that events-based information. What have we found? What's the information? How can we build that workflow to support your mitigation? And if necessary, we can also carry out that takedown activity as well and remove those rogue apps, impersonation accounts, and so on. So understanding what you have, getting that visibility. When your CIO asks you how many websites you have, you'll be able to answer that question, and how many mobile apps and the social media. And like I say, this is pretty almost hard and fast, that 30%. I can't think of many occasions where we found less than 30% more assets. I can think of lots of occasions where we found a lot more. Understand what that is. You know, the top of the list there is certificate issuer, who is providing certificates. You know, that's quite interesting. When I'm reviewing an organisation's digital footprint, I'll just look at things like certificate issuers, the hosting services. Because if an organisation is hosting on 1&1, the German hoster, that's just a red flag in itself. We don't typically see GoDaddy certificates. You see a lot of GoDaddy certificates, but on certain types of sites, it is unusual. So you're looking for these things, and you click on them, and suddenly you expose assets which do not follow typical policy and process within organizations. Give yourself visibility, and then you can ensure that the processes are being followed that you're responsible for. And using my anecdotal approach of looking for the known goodies or the known baddies, we also have the tools to support you doing that yourself, so you can dive into the data. What at-risk frameworks, PHP 5.33, I'd still say a significant number of servers are serving code using a framework which is probably about 10 years old now. IIS 6 servers I mentioned just now. Again, it's amazing how many of those systems are still out there and serving content to us. Site access, how many login pages are there that are using SHA-1 certificates, say, or worse, how many login pages are serving data or providing authentication without any security at all. We can provide access to that information so that this environment can be brought under control, and you can start to ensure that your footprint outside of the firewall is secure. And then the final slide is how to mitigate against that action. So do those takedowns. There is a social media profile which is pretending to be you, offering service or supposed service to your customers. You can step in the way and terminate that. So my takeaways for today. Thank you for your attention, by the way. Your digital footprint is bigger than you think. It's also more complex than you think, and that's one area where, when I ask people whether they have a complex environment, most people do agree with that. They just don't realize how complex it is or how much bigger it is than they thought. You do need to know the state and status of your web assets. These are representing your business, and it is possible through the compromise of these systems. As I say, 50% of breaches come from these unmanaged or unknown assets. Understand the complexity of the mobile ecosystem, that your apps are in stores where you don't expect them to be. They are modifiable, and again, it introduces threats and vulnerabilities to your customers and to your organization, depending on what those apps are doing and the information that is being shared across them. And social media, track that impersonation, act before it becomes a problem. To do this, you need to do it at scale. It is not enough unless you have an infinite number of monkeys. Some people say that Twitter is an infinite number of monkeys. But you do need the ability to do this at scale, and then to consolidate that information so that you can carry out the appropriate mitigation. Thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate that. If there are any questions, I think we've got a few minutes, so it's always a scary moment when no one asks a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. I sort of work across the sort of defence and marine sector quite a bit, where mergers and acquisitions, which you mentioned, appears to be a big problem, followed by rebranding. And then you find a lot of legacy websites around. I mean, what sort of advice would you offer to companies that are very much involved in acquiring other businesses, particularly large ones who buy SMEs who are the innovators, take them over, and then they tend to forget what they did in the past, they just absorb them in?
I think the challenge you have is that the data is going to be lost. There is no magic wand that ensures that at the point of that acquisition that you will get the assets into your list, into your managed infrastructure. So you know, I often talk to people who talk, they do their due diligence and they do their investigations prior to the acquisition taking place. But it still only covers 60 to 70% of the assets. The rest are either in that completely unknown state or they're in the heads of the people who, just by the nature of acquisitions, are no longer vested in the business and therefore going to have the commitment to share that data. So that I think acknowledging that issue is the first step, is knowing that there is going to be a problem, and then be in a position, know your own digital footprint, and then as you add additional brands in, you can extend your monitoring to include those different assets that are out there. But it is an active approach. I don't think you can hope to stop the problem from occurring. All you can hope to do is to be aware of it and then to manage the fact that those assets are out there. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much.